Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books number 82. The first book today is John Adams, A Life by John Ferling, 1982. This is another biography of John Adams, the second U.S. president. I read it while we were filming for our YouTube videos about John Adams, the champion of American independence, U.S. diplomat in Europe. His son Charles and two sons, Charles and Thomas, both died of alcoholism. And his other son, John Quincy, became the sixth U.S. president, a man who served his country well. What an amazing life. Really a forgotten hero from American history, because he was the man who said, who gave speeches and wrote newspaper essays saying the same thing over and over and over again, that the 13 British colonies in North America should fight a war of independence, that enough was enough, that the British arbitrary actions and it was no good. It was time to fight for independence, and he believed that we could win. And furthermore, he said, well, since we're going to become independent, we need to we have to figure out how to govern ourselves, so we have to write state constitutions. So that's why they called him the champion of independence, because a lot of people, public opinion was divided, and a lot of people were, loyalists. A lot of people thought, Great Britain's our country. We shouldn't be fighting them. And besides, they were too powerful, the most powerful empire in history. Why would we fight them? And so he said no, and he believed in our country. Probably one of the first patriots who believed, yes, we should fight, we can do it, and we have a very bright future. And then he did all this work during the war in Europe, risked his life traveling across the Atlantic Ocean to get working for French support in the war, specifically French naval support. And then he got Dutch loans, which were needed to fight and prosecute the war. And then he served loyally under President George Washington as vice president. He kept the country out of war in 1798 against France when there was war fever. A wonderful man, really inspiring. He represented the British soldiers in the Boston Massacre case and trial, because he believed in doing the right thing. He went against public opinion, which was very much anti-British. And he saw the facts of the case, and he thought, no, there were mitigating factors, and these men had been provoked. In fact, their lives were at risk when they fired upon the crowd in Boston. So an incredible, very inspiring life, John Adams. The next book is Thomas Jefferson, A Life by Willard Stern Randall, 1993. Wonderful book. This is 595 pages, and it's about the third U.S. president, another biography of him. And again, I was making YouTube videos about Jefferson, which are available if you scroll down through my video library. And so stories of Maria Cosway. He was, as a young man, young married man, his wife was sickly and died young. And then he had this relationship in Europe with this, actually a married British woman. He's the father of American architecture and American wine. Very interesting, based on his experiences in Europe and the sketches he made, and he promoted these, what you could call a classical architecture, actually going back to ancient Greece and Rome. He's also considered the father of American wine for his interest in that beverage, and importing large numbers of bottles from mostly from France. He visited Nice in France, named after Nike, the goddess of victory. So I guess this is how the company Nike gets its name, from ancient Greece. His wife's depression, she was. This, I'm sure, was a factor in her early death. His mentally retarded sister Jane, who wandered away and died of exposure. Very tragic. So what an inspirational life Thomas Jefferson lived. The man who believed in education, dedicated to learning, dedicated to the common man. His words in the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, changed the world. and he promoted. Really believed in learning himself, and father of the University of Virginia, and maybe his most important contribution to helping the United States become a land of religious freedom. And this has been a wonderful quality that we have had ever since. And we've attracted people from various faiths who made major contributions to our country, from Jewish people and various Christian denominations, and later Buddhist, Hindu, and Muslim immigrants who contributed because they could worship in freedom in the United States. Thomas Jefferson, what an amazing man. Wonderful biography. The next book is Becoming Madison, The Extraordinary Origins of the Least Likely Founding Father by Michael Siner, 2015. So this book is interesting. And Madison, now he makes the case that Madison was a revolutionary, and he wants to use Madison as an inspiration for a leftist revolution today. So I didn't agree with that. And my impression was that the author was a communist. Very controversial. I did get some material for my Madison talks from YouTube. But anyway, it just shows how the different political forces, people on the left and the right, use history for their own uses. So I disagreed with the author, but anyway, this is his opinion. He's a leftist, and he's using James Madison to promote his agenda. But that's fine. You know, people have their own opinions and their own ways of looking at things, and we all have to think for ourselves. We really should. But I disagree with his argument that James Madison is an inspiration for communist revolution today in America. The next book is James Madison by Richard Brookhiser, 2011. Again, this is about the fourth U.S. president, father of the U.S. Constitution. Very hardworking, patient, humble man. He loved reading history books. He helped George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, a big help to both those men. What inspires me about Madison is at a young age, he grew up in Virginia, when the 13 British colonies in North America were part of the British Empire, and there were, as a young man, he could see there were political problems with Great Britain and the American colonies, and so there was talk of fighting for independence. So he became interested in politics and government, and he studied everything he could from history, mostly from ancient Greece and Rome, and from the different countries of Europe over the centuries. And all of that learning helped him to, in his role, his major role, the most important role in the creation of the U.S. Constitution, which made the United States one country in 1787. The War of Independence had been won in 1783, but we were 13 independent countries, more or less, a very weak central government. And so he did all this study. So it inspired me, because sometimes I'm a guy who likes to read books, especially history books, and people think, "Oh, what are you doing? You're not doing anything." But look at what James Madison did. This is what he did, and the result was the U.S. Constitution when we became one country. All this work that he had done, and he had to. He was very soft-spoken, but it shows the importance of character and learning, being a good person, and supporting others. He was a huge help to George Washington's presidency and Thomas Jefferson. Madison served as U.S. president during the dark days of the War of 1812, especially after the British had burned Washington, D.C., they burned the White House down, which was a very, very tough time for our country. Anyway, wonderful, another amazing founding father of the United States, and a wonderful biography of James Madison by Richard Brookhiser. The next book is Manifesting Divine Consciousness in Daily Life by Sri Mrinalini Mata, 2013. It's a very inspiring book. An incredible SRF servant, that would be Self-Realization Fellowship. She worked, this is the Wisdom of India, and actually the church that I belonged in. She worked on the writings of Paramahansa Yogananda and his books. Very kind, wise, simple, wonderful person, Sri Mrinalini Mata, who was the president of Self-Realization, president for a period of time before her passing. God bless her. Wonderful book. The next book is James Madison, a biography by Ralph Ketchum, 1990. This book has 671 pages. Golly, I ended up skimming the book. There was so much information. Again, the father of the U.S. Constitution, God bless James Madison. A man who served his country well, wonderful wife Dolly. He had a tragic stepson, Payne, who brought all kinds of problems. He actually did not father any children. His wife, Dolly, was a widow. She had been married and her husband had died, and she had this son who was a ne'er-do-well, and they had endless financial problems because of him. He was in debtor's prison. They had to bail him out. This book has a lot of political details. This is part of politics. There's all these different issues that happen, and as you're reading it, it becomes, I found it tedious, but it's the reality of his life in politics. James Madison, very interesting, very important. The next book is In My Father's Country, An Afghan Woman Defies Her Fate by Saima Wahab, 2012. This is a tremendous book. The author was a little girl in Afghanistan when the Soviet Union invaded in 1979. Her father was killed by the Russians. Her family became refugees in Pakistan. They left the country. She and her two siblings moved to Portland, Oregon, USA, when she was about 10 years old. Two uncles took care of her. As an adult, she got tired of her uncle's abuse, became independent, and an outcast from her family. Later, she returned to Afghanistan, working as a Pashtun interpreter for the U.S. military and trying to improve relations between Afghans and Americans. She was engaged 3 times to good men, but never wed, never got married, afraid of losing her freedom. She's devoted to Afghanistan and the Afghan people. This is an amazing book because, the author, her origins are in Afghanistan, and then she becomes American, basically, but through life and through childhood, starting at age 10 in the U.S. But as she got older, she had this nagging feeling she wanted to help her country. And since, if you leave your country, you change. And she was not she had become American. Well, she was an Afghan American, a mixture. This is what happens when you leave your country. You still have your former country, your country of origin, but then you also have the new country that you're living in. So she went back to Afghanistan, and she was really trying to help, and I think she did a lot of good in trying to help relations. Because there's been a huge cultural difference between Afghans and Americans in the Afghan war since the United States invaded Afghanistan in 2001. That's 17 years ago, after 9/11, and the U.S. forces are still there. So I don't know what she's doing now, but she really did a lot of good. She risked her life, and she really felt she needed to do it. She wanted to do it. She could have lived her life in the U.S., but she had this sense, she wanted to do something for her country, and so God bless her. And she has done a lot of good in trying to, since she could be a bridge between Americans and Afghans, since she had both cultures, and I believe she did a lot of good. Very wonderful book. The next book is The Law of Success: Using the Power of Spirit to Create Health, Prosperity, and Happiness by Paramahansa Yogananda, 1944. It's a wonderful book. It's a 34-page booklet. The Spiritual Path, Happiness Through God Contact. Wonderful, and this is, again, The Wisdom of India. Really enjoyed it. Tremendous book. And this is my church. The next book is Bend, Not Break, A Life in Two Worlds by Ping Fu, 2012. This is an incredible book. The story of a Chinese-American woman. She grew up in communist China, the Mao Zedong era, the Cultural Revolution. She was taken from her family at age 8 in Shanghai, China, forced to move to Nanjing and lived in a boarding house. Was abused badly by communist government people. At one point, as a girl, she was gang raped. Later, she was deported for writing about female baby infanticide during the one-child policy. So when the Chinese government had a policy where married couples, could only have one child, so everyone wanted a boy. So every time a woman got pregnant with a girl, or gave birth to a baby girl so often, they would kill this baby. They would just take it away and kill it because they wanted a son. Tragic. And anyway, she ended up writing about this terrible thing that was going on in China, the deaths of all these baby girls. And the government got very mad about it, and they thought, "Oh, you're embarrassing our country, making China look bad in the world." So she was deported, forced out of China, had to leave. She was, I believe, in college. She was in her early 20s. So she moved to the United States. She adapted, learned English, became successful in the computer business, founded the company called Geomatic, and became very wealthy. Very successful. She's a good person. Really, this is a very inspiring book. She's not bitter after everything she had been through, all the hardships she suffered growing up. She's very wise and kind. And here's a fine quote from the book. As I dealt with various employee issues during those dark hours, I kept reminding myself, it's all about love. Blaming others, being fearful and angry, acting vengefully, building resentment, destroying trust. These negative responses to trying situations suck us into a downward spiral and sap our energy, like water spinning down a drain. The only way to triumph in business and in life is to love what we do and love our customers, our colleagues, our investors, and our community. Love even the people who drive us crazy, those who undermine us and those who fail us, offering them love and forgiveness. Wow, what an amazing quote. Wonderful. We all have a choice, and what she had been through. She had this very, very traumatic experience as a girl. The Chinese government, which was communist and became all powerful, and did whatever it decided to do, and the people just had to take it. They decided that people were going to be moved, and people were taken away. It was called the Cultural Revolution, when they actually closed the schools in China, and people were forced to leave certain places. And she was taken from her family. She had been adopted, and she was forced to move into a boarding house. Where the thing is, the communist governments are generally at war with families, because families are how people learn things. We learn through our families growing up, different ideas. And then this is a threat to the government, which wants to be the source of learning and ideas and influence. So she was taken away and put in this boarding house, and really, so she was only a little girl. She was 8 years old, and very, very tough. And really, but the thing is, I was so inspired by her story, because she did not become bitter. She's such a positive person, extremely successful. She came to the U.S., didn't know any. I think her English was limited. She learned English, and then became extremely successful. Very hardworking, typical hardworking Chinese person. Very good person. She's not you think, well, some of these people, you think, oh, they're very hard. She's this hard. She's not a hard person. She has done very well financially. But this quote that I read, wow, what's important in life is love. And I agree with that. She's talking about in business, that to love your colleagues and love your customers and love your employees and so forth, your investors and everyone. So this is a very wonderful book. It shows, and I believe it, this is the power of God, a tremendous book. Really enjoyed it. The next book is Shaken, Discovering Your True Identity in the Midst of Life's Storms by Tim Tebow, 2016. This is another wonderful book. It's about the former NFL quarterback, Tim Tebow. In 2011, the Denver Broncos started 1-4 with Cal Orton as quarterback. Then Tebow became their quarterback. They went 7-4 the rest of the way and beat the Steelers in the playoffs. After the season, Denver traded Tebow to the Jets, who didn't play him, then released him. Later, he had tryouts with the Patriots and Eagles, and he was released by both teams. However, he has a very good attitude. He's a strong Christian, likes to make friends with sick children. And I was hoping the Cleveland Browns would sign him. That has not happened. God bless Tim Tebow. Wonderful story. Very inspiring. He's a positive person, even though really I think he's really been mistreated by the NFL for his Christianity. The next book is King of the Hollyhop by Les Roberts, 2008. Again, this is a novel, a whodunit or a murder mystery. Main character, Milan Yakovich, the Cleveland private investigator, Slovenian-American. At his 40th high school reunion, one of his classmates is murdered, and Milan investigates. Many had a motive, so this murder mystery set in Cleveland, Ohio, USA. Very, very entertaining. The next book is James Madison, The Quest for National Identity by Harry Ammon, 1971. This is a ponderous 573 biography of the 5th U.S. president. Tough sledding. So much political information, details, and minutiae. His political work, lots of work, good guy, God bless him. Yeah, this is politics. There's just so much. There's so many details, and it's a reality of life. As politicians have to work together and come and have cooperation, and there are various issues that happen as time passes. And this is the work that he did during his lifetime, before the Constitution and while the Constitution was being written, and in the early years of the United States under the early presidents, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. Very, very interesting, wonderful history. The next book is George, the Poor Little Rich Boy Who Built the Yankee Empire by Peter Golenbach, 2009. This book is the life of George Steinbrenner, Bay Village, Ohio, USA native, owner of the New York Yankees baseball team. He was troubled, selfish, abusive, controlling, crazy. He battled manager Billy Martin, star players Reggie Jackson, Dave Winfield, and many more. He won 7 World Series, blew a lot of money. I felt that he had kind of a sad life, so interesting. This is primarily a baseball book, but it's also good American history. George Steinbrenner. The next book is James Monroe by Gary Hart, 2005. The author was a U.S. presidential contender in 1984 and 1988. I believe he finished second in 1984 for the Democratic nomination behind Walter Mondale. That's the author, Gary Hart. And in 1988, the campaign kind of collapsed because of his stories of his affairs, since he was a married man. So this is all about James Monroe, the 5th U.S. president, a hero in the American Revolution and War of 1812. He helped George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. He was helped by John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. Good man. Yeah, he actually almost died. He could have died at the Battle of Trenton, New Jersey. In December of 1776, he was shot in an artery. Could easily have bled to death, but was saved by a quick-thinking and acting doctor who was on the scene. Good guy. He lost his parents as a young man, and then, but he lived a very successful life. Very hard-working guy, good guy. He actually, in the War of 1812, during the dark days after Washington was burned, he was a huge help to President James Madison and sort of energizing the country and really organizing what became the successful defense of New Orleans under the leadership of Andrew Jackson. And then earlier, he'd actually been in Paris, France, as U.S. ambassador during the Reign of Terror in the French Revolution. And he saved the wife of Lafayette, the French volunteer and hero in the U.S. and the American Revolution. He also helped Thomas Paine, who had been arrested by that crazy government during the French Revolution. James Monroe, good guy, a man of action, very similar, I think, to George Washington. Wonderful biography. The next book is Dear Mr. President, John Quincy Adams, Letters from a Southern Planter's Son by Stephen Kroll, 2001. This actually is a children's book. It's historical fiction. A 12-year-old boy in Georgia in the U.S. is troubled about the plight of the Creek Indians, of course, who eventually were forced to move west and what became known as the Trail of Tears to the Indian Territory, later renamed Oklahoma, what's now in Oklahoma, and This boy and the U.S. President, John Quincy Adams, exchange cordial letters. So this is a fine historical, this is a book for children, and it's a fine historical fiction. Really enjoyed it. The next book is Stealing America by Dinesh D'Souza, 2015. This is a tremendous book. And there's a quote from the book. What my experience with criminal gangs taught me about President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and the Democratic Party. Now progressives, political progressives like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who, to quote Nietzsche, are, quote, tyrants who shroud themselves in virtue. The author is an immigrant from India and a conservative hero. He argues that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and other political progressives want to control the U.S. economy for their own benefit. They want wealth and power and inflame the voters to hate the successful, the wealthy, the producers. And he makes the case here, this is his opinion, that very controversial, that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are criminals. He actually went to prison himself. He describes his experience because for a minor, he was a major critic of former President Barack Obama, and then for that, the Obama administration went after him, and he served time in this. He was prosecuted and served time in this detention center for an illegal campaign contribution. And his opinion and others believe that it was politically motivated. That yes, he had a friend running for political office, and then he actually gave some money to someone who gave the money to the person, and this apparently violated a campaign law. I believe he gave $10,000 of his own money, and then he gave $10,000 to an individual who in turn passed it on, and then he served a year for this violation. He served a year in this detention facility. Every night he had to sleep overnight in this place with these criminals. I find Dinesh D'Souza extremely inspiring. He's an immigrant from India, and he's become an expert in American history. He believes in our country. He's a strong conservative, and he's a real leader in the conservative movement, and he uses history, kind of like Glenn Beck. Very, very wonderful guy, and very knowledgeable and very logical, and I enjoy his books. He does a really good job. It appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. I hope you find a good history book to read or any book. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.